That's a good comedy performance for the evening. Okay. They try to treat banks as just intermediaries, the intermediate between savers and lenders, the savers and borrowers. And in the so-called, a paper that Krugman wrote with a DSG model called Egerton, in the appendix to the paper, not in the actual paper itself, but in the appendix they bring in banking as they see banking, and they have banking as the life of a single loan contract. The loan is issued in terms of an infinitely long-lasting consumer good. It's not actually money, as we were describing earlier. And they are simply, one agent lends to another agent. The patient agent lends to the impatient agent. That's the entire vision. But they extended it here to have the consumer sector being the patient agent, the investment goods sector being the impatient agent. And one thing I thought, all the time they say that only during a period of a financial crisis does the level of debt matter. Okay, because during a financial crisis, it might be that borrowers face constraints that savers don't face, and therefore when the crisis occurs, one party can't balance out an equilibrium what the other party is doing. Now, for a long time I've had to argue on the basis of work by people starting like with Basil Moore. Does anybody who read Basil Moore's 1979 paper? Okay, some reading for you. Basil Moore, 1979, The Endogenous Money Stock. Okay, that's an essential piece of reading. So Basil was somebody who actually empirically did work and said the money stock must be endogenous, both for practical reasons in terms of how banks actually behave, and then statistically as well, looking at the data. And there are predecessors to Basil, including a research director of the Federal Reserve, Alan Holmes, writing back in, I think, the 1960s or 70s, trying to stop the bank falling for monetarism, saying there simply isn't how banks actually operate. But he got overruled. So I had to quote rebels like Alan Holmes or Basil Moore, and then the whole tradition, including Minsky, of course. Now I can quote central banks. So the first was the Bank of England, pointing out that the whole idea of a money multiplier simply violates the principles of accounting. It simply is not possible for banks to lend out of reserves. The whole idea is just ignorant nonsense portrayed by a profession which hasn't even bothered to understand money and yet tells us how to manage money. So here's the Bank of England saying, first of all, rather than banks receiving deposits when households save and then lending them out, bank lending creates deposits. That was the first paper in 2014. I could have fallen over when the Bundesbank came out with a very similar paper, published in German, I believe recently translated into English now. But this is the press release quoting it, saying banks create book money just by an accounting entry. And then it says this wonderful statement, this refutes a popular misconception that banks act simply as intermediaries. Now the normal story when you're talking about something being a misconception is something that amateurs believe that experts know as false. In economics, this is something that most amateurs understand that experts get wrong. Okay? In this case, the popular misconception is the belief of mainstream economists. And I think it's had a huge impact on how well we understand the economy. The Bank of Norway recently as well. The bank does not transfer money from someone else's bank account or from a vault full of money. So I'm delighted to see central banks taking the lead here. I could claim a certain amount of credit, but I won't. But I think what's happening is something I expected to see happen, and that is that the central banks in particular these days, because they took the dominant role in economic policy, largely on the advice of academic economists that said you shouldn't do fiscal policy, forget about fiscal policy, it should all be monetary policy, and it should be done by experts who of course have PhDs in economics, and they should be making the decision just about the rate of interest on it to affect the rate of inflation, forget about employment. That's all the advice central banks took. And they built these enormous elaborate models based on the toy models that people like Lucas and Sargent and Rapping and Kittlin and Prescott first put together. And what I'm seeing in my own work is a similar sort of thing. An academic like myself will come up with a new concept. Okay? It then gets taken on by people who simply think well, they don't know the limitations of the concept, frankly, and therefore they go well beyond it. So what you have is central banks, first of all, get people like Lucas publishing a 3-equation model, quite simple toy model, which was the original real business cycle model. And then central banks build these enormous structures on top of that, taking that as gospel and building this huge structure. Yeah.
I just